I'm ChosenArchitect, and this is Stoneblock 4. Yes, more Stoneblock 4, and I tell you what, over the last few episodes, I have really been prepping myself for this antimatter production that we're going to inevitably need to get set up. And this is going to be a strange one, because to be able to produce the antimatter that is going to be needed, we also needed these, well, neutron piles from the Avaricia mod. And so I needed to go through some processes of accelerating this and making sure we could produce enough to be able to, well, process some of our waste that we're going to need to process once we actually get a Mekanism reactor up and running. And I mean, looking in the quest here, this is a pretty big jump in progression, I will say. At this point, we really haven't touched on many aspects of Mekanism, nor have we needed anything really from Mekanism. And so we are immediately faced with the end game of Mekanism, and that is just making an antimatter pellet. No special recipe. Quite literally, we need to go through the strenuous process that is setting up a fission reactor. And that's not even the hard part. The reactor is, in my opinion, quite easy. It's setting up fissile fuel and also making sure we don't destroy our base. Now, in this pack, we are given a neutron activator, which does mean we could technically set this up in another dimension. So we could do this in a compact machine and you don't have to worry about irradiating your base. But I'm going to be setting this up in my base. 100% we're doing this. Oh, and the reason why you can't normally set this up in, well, inside of a compact machine is because you end up with a problem of needing sunlight, which the solar neutron activator would typically take care of. But in this pack, instead of that, because we don't have access to a sky, we get the neutron activator, which is a multi-block we're going to have to build. And hopefully we can set this up to be able to process our materials quickly. I honestly just don't know how fast this works, so I don't know how many of these we are going to need, which could lead to some problems. And we are going to have to get through those problems together. So today's focus, definitely on Mekanism and getting fissile fuel up and running. That's going to be our first priority. And that is going to be doable thanks to what we set up a few episodes ago, or last episode technically, and that is the mycelial reactor. This is producing 25 million RF per tick, or FE per tick, and it is just simply running off of all of these generators being kept up with and being voided of their power or being used of their power. You just got to make sure that they are non-stop running in order for you to generate this much power. And this power is going to be very, very helpful to us, as it's going to allow us to get all of these machines up and running that get very, very expensive on RF power, especially when they're fully upgraded. Now, in the barrel that is behind me is the secret sauce that is going to make today's video so easy to understand. And I'm hoping that this process will be the easiest demonstration of fissile fuel setup that I've ever done. But let's go ahead and break down fissile fuel. So fissile fuel is really only 3 parts whenever you break it fully down. And that means you're going to have a line that is going to process sulfur, a line that processes uranium, and a line that combines the processes of both of those two into fissile fuel. Starting with the processing of sulfur, we're going to need a chemical oxidizer, 2 chemical infusers, and a rotary condensator. Now, also included in all of these setups, we do want a passive supply of oxygen and hydrogen. And these are going to be pretty expensive, and we're going to use 2 electrolytic separators to make sure we can keep up with any demand that we may need for anything in the future. So this is going to be a pretty hefty consumer of power. Now, the way this process is going to work is we are going to take our sulfur dust, send it through a chemical oxidizer that is going to produce sulfur dioxide. And then we're going to take that sulfur dioxide, combine it with some oxygen and water, and that is going to produce sulfur trioxide. Then in another chemical infuser, we're going to send that with some water vapor that we're going to make with a rotary condensator by just simply sending water to it. And that combination should be able to produce sulfuric acid, which is the ultimate thing that we're trying to get from this line. And then I have a special way of sending this sulfuric acid to the other machines, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Then on the uranium side of things, we need to send this into an enrichment chamber. This is actually going to produce yellow cake uranium. And then this side is super easy. That yellow cake uranium, well, it just needs to go into a chemical oxidizer. Yep, and that is going to produce the uranium oxide, that is also needed for the final steps. Now, for that final step, we are going to take our sulfuric acid and combine it with fluorite, and that is going to produce hydrofluoric acid. Then we'll send hydrofluoric acid and the uranium oxide from our uranium setup, and then that is going to be combined in a chemical infuser to produce uranium hexafluoride. Once that uranium hexafluoride is produced, we have to send it through one more machine, and that is the isotropic centrifuge, which will then convert the uranium hexafluoride into fissile fuel. And that's basically it. Another thing we're also going to need today is also HDPE sheet production. We're going to get to that after we get this set up. It's going to be a really simple process. So now let's take all of that, and we need to kind of develop a way that we can transfer around products. And this is where Mekanism already has a built-in mechanic, and it works really, really well for this stuff. And that is through the power of the quantum entangle porter. Yes, it sounds complicated, but it is very, very clean and easy to set up. And I do have the ability to auto-craft this, so let's go ahead and get these set up. And we don't need a whole lot of them. We're just going to need enough to be able to transfer around the byproducts of each line. So now let's have some fun. First thing we need to get set up are our electrolytic separators. And I'm going to place an electrolytic separator right here and also on this side. We're going to have two of them. Kind of like to just have them symmetrical, not a big deal, but we also need water constantly sent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a pipe from Mekanism, which I already set up all the autocrafts for, and we'll just use a regular ultimate Mekanism pipe here. We're also going to need our configurator for all these projects. And I'm just going to send some water out of a pitcher plant directly into a quantum entangle porter, but not after I define this. So this is going to be called water. And as soon as we select this, we can now get water from this plant and it can be sent into here. This is really cool because this quantum entangle porter, while it can't auto pull items in, it can auto output things on the sides that we define. That's going to be very helpful later on. So at this point, I've just created like an infinite water source, kind of. I mean, it is fast, but it's not going to be fast enough to keep up with something like a fission reactor. That's something we're going to work on later on down the road. I don't want to spoil things yet. Okay, but after getting this set up, I'm thinking, yeah, I'll lower this down in the ground to make it look a little bit nicer. That way, we can set this up down here, and I'll have this out of the way so that way we're not worrying about anything touching each other. Now, what can a quantum entangle porter do? Well, it can send fluids, gases, it can also send items, believe it or not, and even power. But I'm actually not going to use it to send power to our Mekanism machines. Instead, I am going to use gates for that from the power mod. So my setup for this, since I'm just going to be sending water to here, is I'll place this, select water, set the side, and then I will say, hey, auto output to the bottom. And that's going to automatically send water, I do believe, if I was under the right section, which is underneath the liquids. There we go, auto output, and perfect. You see, this is now sending water into this, and we have hydrogen and oxygen. And both of these sides are going to be exactly the same. And yes, inside of each of the things that we're producing, we do want to make sure we label it as such. For example, hydrogen is going to be going into this one. So I am going to call this entangle porter hydrogen and make the channel for this, much like I'm going to do for this one, and call it oxygen. Beautiful. Now we have hydrogen and oxygen. This is filling with hydrogen. You can kind of see by the jade tooltip up there. And this one is filling with oxygen. We got to put some speed upgrades and efficiency upgrades in here. This is going to be running really good. But what I do want to do is shift right click to copy this and then just paste it over to the other setup. This is how simple this is going to be. Also, we do not have to configure the electrolytic separator. It is already set up, which is beautiful. And once all of these are done, this will also kick on because all of the configurations were just simply copied over and pasted to the new setup. Beautiful. We won't be doing this for a lot of things as we don't really need to duplicate a lot of stuff, but for these setups, it works nicely. By the way, after getting the upgrades inside of these machines, just want to show that with just 8 efficiency and 8 of the speed upgrades, this is using 40,000 FE per tick. This is over double of what I was producing before upgrading to the higher power. So this is why I say before that this setup right here, it gets very power hungry. Also, we do want to make sure dumping excess is turned on for both sides and both of the machines. Things are looking pretty good. And now we get to focus on our sulfur processing. Okay, so first things first, we'll get sulfur that goes directly into here. I'm going to use AE to be able to do this. And we're going to take our sulfur dust and make sure this gets exported. Thankfully, we have a chicken that does constantly produce the sulfur, and we can upgrade this with some speed upgrades to make sure it sends the exact amount needed. We'll power this in a second. As of right now, this is going to be producing that acid that we do need to send over here, but we also need to combine this with a couple of other things. And so now would be a good time to actually mention that most of the machines for Mekanism accept items from any side for the most part, but usually output to the right-hand side. So going from left to right is usually a pretty good path, so you don't have to spend as much time in these configuration windows. As you can see, input and output are both defined right here on the left and right of this machine. But if we go to the actual output of the chemical, usually it is defined, well, in this case, it's defined on the front, but usually it's defined on the right-hand side. We are going to have to configure these a little bit. Notice, for example, the chemical oxidizer, the output is on the right-hand side, but we do have to set it to auto eject if we do want to send it automatically through a pipe. Or in this case, because it is a chemical, a pressurized tube. Now on the back here for this chemical infuser, we do need oxygen, and thankfully we can use our quantum entangle porter to do this. I'm going to place this on the back, select our oxygen channel, and hit set. We'll come back to this in a second, but on this machine, we want to color code this, where this right here is our red side. You can also see what's connected to it. And then back here is actually the entangle porter. And I do want to clear these. You can hold shift to clear these settings right here. I'm going to set the setup back here on the back as the input 2, which is what we're going to use the entangle porter to auto eject it or auto send into here. And then we actually want our next product or output to be automatically sent to the right-hand side. So this is now configured. We want to go into the oxygen, and we just want to say underneath the chemicals tab that we want to send an output over here into the chemical infuser, and we just hit auto eject. And that is going to send oxygen into here, and now we're producing sulfur trioxide. As we progress on, things are going to get a little bit noisier, and that's where those muffler upgrades come into play. We'll do that after we get this next step done. But this next step, oh boy, this one is a little bit more interesting, as we are going to need water vapor in the mix. So back here, I have a rotary condensator, and we can look at water, vapor, and whenever we click on this, we can see this is decondensating. This actually tells us what mode this needs to be in. And there's a mode button right up here. And when we click this, you can see it now says decondensating. That's pretty important. So now all we have to do is send water into this via the top, or we can actually send it into a chain through the back, much like this with our entangle porter from the water source we're producing over here. And so there we go. This is auto sending water onto this side, but I think in this machine, we do have to change which side it does receive fluids from, I think. Well, it shouldn't actually. It should just be able to accept these. Oh, I didn't actually select water. So now that I've selected water, perfect. This is now producing water vapor. And I placed this machine facing this way, and the direction does matter. We want to make sure that this water right here, this water vapor, gets sent into this infuser here. So for right now, we'll just make sure that this is set to an output. We'll clear that, and then we'll have the auto eject sent on. And I think that's fine. I think the water vapor should be considered like a chemical, right? And auto on, and we need to make sure this side can actually accept water vapor. But first, I do want to add another chemical pipe just to make sure that that trioxide is going here. And then inside of this machine, we're going to make sure that that config is set up there. Beautiful. Now we're producing sulfuric acid, and honestly, this is the hardest one to set up. Now there's still one more configuration that we need to set up, and I did go ahead and muffle these, and that is this we want to output automatically to the right-hand side. So currently this is set to front, and so we'll make sure that output is set to the right. And then we can just slap on a tube like this, and now we need to label this what our output is, which is sulfuric acid. And as soon as I create this channel, that will then link up, and this is now receiving sulfuric acid. Perfect. And we can send that to our final location. We still have one more thing to do before we can actually produce fissile fuel, and that is that we need to, well, make that uranium oxide. And this one's as easy as it gets. We need to take an enrichment chamber and then crush up the uranium. And so an enrichment chamber is just going to go right here. In our configurations, I am going to change them and make them go from this side, the right side, to the left side, ultimately going into this quantum entangle porter. I think that design is going to look nice. Does it make it easier to understand? Not exactly. But we need to send items that get processed from here into this machine. So config for the enrichment chamber, input on the right, output on the left, auto eject on. Config for the chemical oxidizer is going to be item input on the side here, chemical output on the left-hand side, auto eject on. Now, funny thing about this setup is we will most likely need more than one of these oxidizers. This is probably one of the slowest processes, and I usually set up about 3 of these chemical oxidizers for this setup, and we may run into needing more than one enrichment chamber, but we will have to upgrade this and see how that goes. And I also want to say same for the sulfur oxidizer. Like, this is something that also takes a bit, and we are probably going to need more than one of those. Now, some other things that I have found is that using a Mekanism pipe doesn't really work all that well, and it doesn't evenly distribute to all of the chemical oxidizers. And so I have found that using like the pipes from the pipe mod and using at least an advanced upgrade in here is going to work really, really well, and making sure the distribution here is set to round robin. That works out really, really nicely. And even though it's not all Mekanism, it doesn't all have to be, especially if you have these other mods around. And so we'll slap in some uranium here, throw in some upgrades. I have gotten a lot of questions basically saying, Chosen, how do you have this menu right here? And this little menu, by the way, is from me having a network tool in my inventory. So make a network tool from Applied Energistics, and you'll be able to get this stuff. Look at there. This is all up and running. Got to get some speed upgrades and efficiency upgrades. But that is all we need for this line to work. And we'll label that uranium oxide, just set up all of my pressurized tubes, and now uranium oxide is in its own quantum entangleporter. You know what, now that I think about it, we may not even need like multiple chemical oxidizers for machines like this or this, because we can have more than 8 energy and efficiency upgrades in here. So this producing, or this consuming like 8,000 RF at 16 upgrades in here, I mean, that's producing quite a bit of the sulfur trioxide. So now for our final step in making fissile fuel, and that is going to be the chemical dissolution chamber. We're going to start with that, and we need to send this some different materials that we're already producing. This is actually where our sulfuric acid is going to go. So we can select sulfuric acid, set this, and then inside of the config for the dissolution chamber, I have my item input for the right-hand side, and then chemical input. It is going to accept the main input from the back, which is right here, and then it's going to output to the right-hand side. So inside of our entangleporter, we need to go underneath the chemicals tab, and we want to make sure that our output is automatically sending, just like this, into the back. And so now we have sulfuric in here, and now all we got to do is get some fluorite up into here, and I'll use my AE2 be able to do this. And so fluorite in there, some speed upgrades, and this is now producing exactly what we need, and we can go ahead and give it some power, and we will get some upgrades, but there's that hydrofluoric acid. Now on to the next machine, the chemical infuser. We do need to send this into here, so a pressurized tube will simply do that job, and there it goes. But from the back, this is where we are going to be combining the other product that we made, the uranium oxide. So back into here, we will go ahead and set another one of these and select uranium oxide, which is this one right here. And we'll set that and make sure that the output is set not under items, but underneath chemicals, and set that to output, auto eject. And that just sent that into here. And our config for this is set up as such: input from the right, input 2 from the back, and then output automatically to the left. And there's uranium hexafluoride now being produced. And so one of the very last steps is just sending it into another machine, which is the isotropic centrifuge. We'll place in a cable, and the settings is going to be input from the right and then output to the left automatically, which will automatically go into the entangleporter, which is now producing fissile fuel. And inside the quantum entangleporter, fissile fuel is now defined, and this is fissile fuel that is being stored in here. Now, some upgrade tips: make sure that you give yourself some chemical upgrades that go inside this bad boy. I think 8 is the max it can accept inside of the chemical dissolution chamber. We do want to make sure we have those chemical upgrades in here, and that's the only machine that actually receives chemical upgrades in this whole setup. And this, on top of everything else, will reduce the amount of sulfuric acid needed for the process. And so with all of them upgraded to at least 8 upgrades each, you will be able to see the cost here. This is not too bad, 1,000 RF per tick. And then we have 204,000 RF per tick needed to run this at maximum speed, which if you can see dwindles very quickly, which we won't be running at maximum speed on this machine. And same for this one, 204 FE per tick. This is running with 8 of the energy upgrades and also 8. It goes even higher than that when you go up even more. This will use millions, but at this rate, we should be maintaining around 256 millibuckets per tick, which is quite a good amount, and honestly will produce antimatter in not so long of a time. Like, I've had estimations of that rate. I mean, easily will pull off about 1,000 millibuckets of antimatter at least every 40 minutes. And you could just spend some time decorating, and before you know it, you'll have all the antimatter you'll need. But that, my friends, right here is what we need to be able to produce the fissile fuel for the actual reactor. Now, we still need to set up something else, and that is HDPE sheets. And surprisingly, we already have all of the ingredients to be able to make this. It's just going to require a few tweaks to our existing setup. So remember that we ended up setting gas burning generators up? Well, we can still use these gas burning generators, believe it or not, to produce, well, the HDPE sheets. And I was actually saving these things over here. These bad boys are substrate, and substrate is actually what we need to convert to be able to get HDPE sheets. So let's take a look at what is going to be required here. So we need to take our substrate, combine it with some oxygen and some liquid ethylene, and that will produce HDPE sheets. Or we can go even further and just simply take one substrate and multiply the substrates here. I think, however, just going this route is going to be perfect. And this is where I'm actually going to break this setup here. So I'm going to take my 2 gas burning generators that are up top here, and what I'm going to do instead is swap them out for entangle porters. And I want these to be ethylene entangle porters. And I know I keep calling them ethylene. I feel like at some point they were called ethylene, but this is ethene. I keep getting that wrong. But yes, ethene is the base that we are getting here. And we need to turn this into liquid ethene. So there's ethene. And I will also label this one ethene, clicking the same one. And is it automatically accepting it? It is. Look at that. So starting from here, this is essentially what we're going to have. We need to take our ethene that we're producing over here, and I want to send that into a chemical tank. And this is kind of important. This makes sure that those other 2 setups are constantly producing substrate, because we could end up with a scenario where we end up with a backup of ethene, and we don't want to back it up of ethene. So we actually want to make sure we can dump, and to be able to dump excess chemicals, well, we need to use a chemical tank. Well, chemicals that aren't radioactive, that is. And so with ethene in here, we want to take our chemicals and output to the right automatically. And then I'll just send that over with a pipe, making sure that that gets stored now in this chemical tank. And thankfully, the chemical tank has its own settings, so we can auto eject the chemical to the right-hand side and continue that on. And that is going to go into the condensator, which is going to do the opposite of what we did earlier, which is the decondensing. We actually want to turn this into a liquid. So we're going to turn this into liquid ethene. And that leads us to the PRC, or pressurized reaction chamber. In the back, I'm going to slap down the quantum entangle porter, and we need oxygen for this setup, making sure that underneath the chemical tabs, we are auto outputting that oxygen into our PRC. And then back here, we do want to make sure that we have an input for this. So we'll set that to red underneath our chemicals, that is. There we go. Input. Oh, wait, no, this is a liquid. That's right. No, wait, oxygen is a gas. So this should be accepting from the back into the chemical slot. Did I make sure and select this properly? Let's just make sure. Chemicals, I messed up there. Perfect. Auto output chemicals, not items, which I think is what it defaults to. Beautiful. Chemicals are in. You can see I do get confused with this from time to time too. That is the thing with Mekanism. There is so many configs, and the more you can limit the amount of configs, the better off you'll be. I mean, some other tips is like the wrench technically has a menu, and you can click the chemicals and kind of define this by clicking on the machine. I don't find this to be any more helpful though. Now the rest of this machine should be set up and should be just fine. We just have to give this some of that substrate that we have. So we'll end up running an AE cable here, but let's go ahead and send some of the liquid into this. So a pipe is going to be exactly what we need here. So there is a ultimate mechanical pipe. And this, I believe, will be set to auto output for the liquid ethylene. There it is. There's the liquid ethene, not ethylene. And yeah, all we need is to get that cable running up here. Export bus on the top, and then we'll throw in the substrate. The substrate will go into here, and it's already getting ready to start producing. And then our output, we'll just use a logistical pipe from Mekanism. There we go. Actually, I'll upgrade this to the ultimate version. Doesn't really matter, just for aesthetics though, going with the ultimate, which is going to be like the best pipe that you can use in this scenario. And that will just auto send it to this frame drawer, which I designed using the power cable thing from Mekanism. And then we also have just the regular steel block. And now, honestly, I don't even think this setup is going to need any upgrades whatsoever. I mean, we don't need a ton of this stuff. There's not a lot that it will be used on, and it'll definitely build up by the time we get anything else done. I tell you what, this went by way faster than I thought it was going to. So let's make sure to lock this, add it to our network, and look at that. I mean, we have this all up and running. This is definitely keeping a consistent amount of fissile fuel running, and I've had this running for a nice amount of time now. So everything with its current setup looks like it is able to handle it no problem whatsoever. I mean, this is keeping up. This is keeping up. It looks like we are running a little bit low on this over here, the hexafluoride, I believe, or no, the uranium oxide. So we may need a little bit of a boost over here. But I mean, I still think that this is easily keeping up even at this rate. Now, I usually like to keep these videos split up into separate parts, one for making fissile fuel and also making HDPE sheets, which is usually needed in both cases. And I like to separate this from the actual fission reactor because the reactor has its own mechanics that we're going to have to be very detailed on just to prevent our base from being irradiated. So hopefully you're looking forward to that new episode, which will be next episode. We're going to be setting all of that up, playing around with all of those new mechanics, and hopefully you guys are ready for that. If you are, be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Well, give this video, guys, a huge thumbs up. Lots of big things that's going to be happening in the next few episodes as we get our hands on some antimatter. And of course, guys, with that being said, it's now time for me to thank the amazing supporter of today's episode. And that huge thanks, well, that is going to go out to Kimiko. Thank you so much for your amazing support in choosing to support me over on the Discord, becoming a Discord premium member, and just supporting my content in one of the best ways possible. You absolute boss. And thank you so much for going above and beyond and getting access to every perk over on the Discord. I appreciate you very, very much. And guys, I thank all of you too. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. And as always, thanks for watching.